So the first thing I'm going to ask you, same thing that I have for everybody and how we started all of these. We're going to go back to your law beginnings.
Okay.
And what made you decide to become an attorney, and describe your law school experience?
When I went to college, my plan was to become, first of all, it was a psychologist. And then by the time I graduated, it's like, well, maybe I'll just get into counseling rather than have to get a PhD. But I wasn't ready to go to graduate school because I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I got a job. And inside of 1 year, I had two different people from different parts of my life say, I really think you ought to consider going to law school. So I did.
And your law school experience, tell us about it. When and where?
I started at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1983. Worked my way, argued my way onto the moot court bench about a semester early at the end of my, I guess, second year, first semester. Made it onto law school made it onto moot court that semester. Did several competitions and graduated in 1986.
And take us through your career from 1986 till now.
I practiced law down on St. Mary's Street and then on Jones Street for about 14 and a half years, and practiced almost everything that's done in district court, mostly domestic, but I also did some criminal. I had a law partner who was a member of the General Assembly, who was a criminal defense lawyer. So when the General Assembly was in session, I would have to fill in for him in court very often. Sometimes it was just holding his place in line until he could get there when they were ready to try a case.
And this was a private practice?
This was a private practice.
And what firm were you at?
It changed names several times. I think when I started, it was Huggard and Hensley. And then it was Hensley, Huggard, and Overby. And it had many, many names. Eventually, there was a Bousman in there. Probably the last maybe 4 or 5 years that I practiced law. But I was appointed to the bench in the first week of January of 2001 and took the bench on February 2nd of 2001 until I retired on December 31st, 2020 or January 1st, 2021.
And talk to us about, and that whole time has been here in Raleigh and in Wake County.
Yes.
Talk to us about the changes that you saw in that time in the legal landscape of Wake County.
Well, I was just thinking as I was driving here this morning, it's like, this looks nothing like it did when I practiced law, or even when I left the bench. I didn't have much reason to come over this way, but everything is bigger. I don't know whether it's better or not. But I would say that all of the technological changes that we have seen over the course of the last, I have to say, over 40 years, don't I? But in the last 40 years, when I was in law school, we were introduced to this new little thing called Westlaw, but it only worked when you were in the library. There were very few of us that had personal computers. I didn't really even know what a personal computer was. And even the firm I went to work with, they had word processors. So, and then everything that's happened since, when I was practicing law, I really didn't use email. I understood it a little bit, but didn't use it extensively. And I think one day I was presiding in domestic court, probably my first year on the bench, and all of a sudden one night I got the bright idea that if I just email these two lawyers at the same time in the same email, then I can tell them both the same thing at the same time, and nobody can accuse me of talking to one before I talk to the other. And so email became my friend. And then I started using the laptop extensively, used it for drafting orders. I took it home, but it was connected to the internet at the office. But I think the pandemic taught us then that we could do things a different way. Who would ever have imagined that I would be conducting hearings over a website, and that the participants actually liked it that way? They didn't have to worry about coming into a germy building. I did it with participants sitting in their car sometimes. They didn't have to take off a whole day from work. Maybe we could arrange to do a hearing during the lunch hour. And then, of course, this odyssey happened after I retired, but I do serve as an emergency judge, and I'm quite familiar with using Odyssey in criminal court now.
And yeah, the technology, obviously, and that's such an interesting. I love that you brought up holding hearings during the pandemic. That's so interesting, and I'll come back to that too. And talk to me about the not just the change, and you spoke to it technologically, but the makeup of the bar and the makeup of it. Like when you graduated in 1986, how many women were graduating with you at UNC?
I think my class was almost half women. And then I look back some 10 or 12 years earlier at the women that became the model for the rest of us. Joy Hamilton. Joy Hamilton went on the bench right as I got the news that I had passed the bar. And I had known her for many years. Didn't know her certainly when she was in law school, but when I looked at what those women had to go through just to make themselves heard and to be able to take their place inside the legal landscape, it was astonishing. But I think that for the most part, Carolina was almost 50-50, maybe not quite.
And so you were the next step in the next generation for them. And do you consider some of those women to be mentors in your legal life?
Absolutely.
And talk to us about that and the importance of it.
Well, it was very difficult I watched their careers, Joy Hamilton, Ann Salisbury. I watched them as Ann I knew as both an attorney that we practiced on the opposite sides a couple of times in domestic court, but then as a judge. And it because they were a judge, it was very difficult to approach and ask them questions, not because they wouldn't have answered it, but because it's like, no, you don't ask the judge the question. You got to figure this out for yourself. And I have tried, I've tried very hard to make it known that I am approachable and you can come ask me things. And whether I'm supposed to or not, I often had teaching moments in court, but everybody was involved. I presided for more than 17 and a half years in juvenile abuse and neglect court and had lots of attorneys on any one case, and they knew that they could say, can we approach? And we could talk about something at the bench, or we could go into chambers to try to help make them understand sometimes what my thinking was, but oftentimes what the law was.
And do you think those things that you learned as a mentee, did you then pass on as a mentor? Tell us about that.
I certainly have tried. And even now, I preside when I'm called in to Wake County to serve as a fill-in judge, I'm doing mostly DWIs. And sometimes I'm surprised at the things that the younger lawyers don't know about what the law is, and have discovered that I don't think that they're getting it. They're not mentees even of the people that they're working for, that they're kind of, I get the feeling sometimes that maybe they're hired and they're just kind of thrown into the deep end of the pool and they don't know how to swim yet, which is something that we used to have when the courthouse was a different configuration, and you would walk out of the courtroom door and you'd go into the anteroom. That's where lawyers gathered, and they talked. And if you were a young lawyer, you could kind of just sit there and listen and absorb what they were talking about. You'd always have somebody to go that you could go to and ask a question. And lawyers, bless their hearts now, I think are so busy. We have 2 courthouses. Many of them are in both courthouses in the same day, which is almost impossible. I don't know how in the world they do it. But I don't know that they have a whole lot of time to talk to young lawyers. And there doesn't appear to be a natural gathering place that I've noticed when all of the courtrooms were redone inside the courthouse itself, that anteroom was gone. It didn't exist anymore. Clerks didn't have their own space right outside judges' chambers anymore. And it was all for very good reasons, and certainly the way the Justice Center has been configured, there's no place for lawyers to go sit down and talk about a case. There's some conference rooms, but they can't gather there because somebody's in there talking to the client.
So what is, and I should ask this later, but I'm going to ask it now. What is your best advice to your mentees, to the mentee that now?
Find somebody you trust. Find somebody that will spend some time with you, that you know would always take your phone call. Somebody that you know that you can intentionally run into in one of the court buildings that would stop and answer your question if they had time.
And my next question is a 2-part question. As an attorney, talk to us about the importance of that attorney-client relationship. And then as a judge, can you speak to the importance of that judge-counsel relationship in the courtroom?
Well, and certainly you really, an attorney really needs to understand their obligations as an attorney. I know it's tough to sometimes get your clients to pay you, and you don't want to work for free, and I understand that. I did an awful lot of free work that wasn't intended to be free work. But attorneys need to understand that when they sign on to the case, they're on that case whether they're paid or not. And sometimes those hearings in court don't go over very well when they want to withdraw because they haven't been paid. They do need to understand that they have an obligation to let their client know what's going on all the time. And when I practiced law, which was, again, back in the dark ages, the minute I got back to my office, if a case got continued, and even if my client was standing right there beside me, there was a letter that was generated within 48 hours that went out to them to say, your next court date is this. Very often now, because judges have permitted, in certain situations, defendants not to always come to criminal court, while we're trying to work through handling administrative type matters, then I think clients lose touch, lawyers lose touch with the defendants, and all of a sudden it's time to try the case, and the defendants know where to be found, and then of course they come in and want to blame the lawyer for why they missed a court date.
And talk to us about, as a judge, your judge and your relationships with the prosecution and the defense, and your relationship in the court, the importance of that. You spoke to it a little bit as being so approachable.
I think it's important to me that the attorneys trust me, that they know that I'm not new around here. I've done this for a long time. I'm always willing to learn something new. I love it, even though that they could cite me to a case and I could probably look at it on my computer. I love it when they bring me a printed out version of it so I can start highlighting things if this is something they want me to use in my decision. it's important to me that the lawyers trust me and that they know that, number one, I do not intentionally embarrass them. Sometimes I used to get the feeling that sometimes judges would do that, but I'm very careful. Even if I am not very happy with what the lawyer's doing or not doing, perhaps not even showing up in the courtroom when we need them, I try to make sure that I never embarrass that person, especially while their client's there. But I don't want to embarrass them in front of their colleagues either. But if I need to have a conversation, I'm going to have the other side with me at the bench, but we're going to have that conversation at the bench and not in person.
And what is a moment in the courtroom that brings you joy and makes you feel proud? Is there an instance you can share with us?
As I said before, I practiced. I don't know why I keep saying I practiced. I think because I did that longer than I even practiced law. I was presided in juvenile abuse and neglect for more than 17 years. And I think probably the time that I became, there were lots of situations that would bring me close to tears in testimony in open court. But I had a case rather late in my judicial career where because we were a family court district, once we started hearing a case, we heard it all the way through until the time that the child was returned home, the child was placed in somebody else's custody or guardianship, or until the child was adopted. And I had handled this one case for many years, and it turned out that because of some mistakes that were made, some legal mistakes that were made, on the I don't want to call names, but there was something that happened that I had to backtrack on because somebody had not followed one of my orders. And I couldn't hold the fact that a referral wasn't made against the parent. And so I had to keep taking this case to go on longer than it should have. And we let children, because of the sensitive nature of the topic, and plus because of the children's needs, we would let children testify in chambers. We had the equipment, another technological device that allowed us to do the testimony in chambers. And I don't think this was not a recorded testimony, but the lawyers were in chambers, and they wanted me to tell the child why I was going to do what I was going to do. And it wasn't what the child wanted. But when I went in there and I told her what was going to happen, she came up and hugged me, because to me it meant that she knew that I was trying my best to take care of her.
Yeah, I mean
and that was my job. It was to do what was in her best interest as long as it followed the law.
I've never met a judge who doesn't have a funny moment in court. And it can be one of the virtual hearings. It can be any of that.
Those virtual hearings, I fortunately only had to do about 6 or 7 months of those. And because I don't know that there was anything, I don't know anything funny that happened during those, except sometimes the parents or grandparents or whoever was doing it, they might be all in the same house, and they would forget that recording was going on, and they would be doing things in the background. Let's just say they shouldn't have been doing. We were trying to get somebody to come to the camera one time to start testifying. And let's just say I think they were in a state of undress that would not have been appropriate.
No, what about in the courtroom? What's
in the courtroom? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there were things that were funny, but I can't recall one right off the top of my head.
When was a time that you faced an ethical dilemma in your career?
My ethicals or somebody else's ethicals? I probably the first year I was on the bench, an attorney came up after hours to get an ex parte custody order, and Judge Hamilton was the chief, and it was late one Friday afternoon, and everybody else had left. I think it was Judge Hamilton and I were in the office. And it was something that she would have usually handled as chief, but she said, Monica, I need you to take care of this for me. So I did. And I read the complaint, read the motion, talked to the lawyer, and granted the order. It turned out that the next week I was in the courtroom where that case was returned for its hearing within 10 days, and discovered very quickly that there was not just a little fib. There was a blatant lying to my face. And I really didn't know what to do. I mean, I did what needed to be done legally to undo it, and the lawyer wasn't there. And I know I talked to several other judges about what my responsibility was. And it just so happened that Mel Wright and David Long had come by to talk to another judge about a different issue, and they were sent down the hall to talk to me. And they just looked at me and said, Judge, you don't have a choice. You've got to report this. And then ultimately, I had to go testify in front of the bar. That was probably the first time that happened was the most, and I think that was the only time that I had to report an attorney to the bar. There were many attorneys that I had the privilege of defending when the bar would call and say, tell us what's going on with this lawyer in this case. And I said, oh, well, let me tell you how many lawyers that particular person has had. So I was able to defend lawyers' actions, but that was the first time, and it was early in my career, and it was a very difficult thing for me to have to do.
And, the practice of law and being an attorney lends itself to be stressful.
Oh, absolutely.
Pressure.
Absolutely.
So how did you handle that? Like, what did you do in your life to create balance for yourself?
I've always had a very good outlook on life. I'm not going to tell you I never brought work home with me, literally and figuratively. There were many nights. When I was in abuse and neglect, I was one of 2 or 3 judges that got called in the middle of the night because something had happened and they had to take a child into custody. And many nights I never went back to sleep. But I have a strong faith, and I knew that what I was doing, that I was there for a reason. I was there for a purpose. And as long as I could fulfill that purpose, then I usually could cope with whatever happened very well. And I could go to my sister's house and play with the dog.
So outside of the law, what was important to you?
Well, I've been very active in my church. I have a grown nephew with Down syndrome. We have a special needs ministry that I lead at church. I also sing in the choir, and I love to sing. And there are other things that I do that, like, lots of people think that they're fun, but being on church committees is just something that has to be done to figure out how the church is going to operate. So that's mostly between that and family. When my nieces and nephews were little, I used to make birthday cakes and plan parties and things like that for them.
the bar association and watching the bar through the years and changes, what kind of impact did the bar have, and what kind of changes have you seen to the bar and the bar association since 1996?
I don't know. I mean, you've always given very good CLE programs. Because of the courtroom work, I didn't make it to many of the bar luncheons. I think judges, before I went on the bench, I think that judges used to be able to make it out of the courthouse more often. That by the time I started, our caseloads were just horrendous, and we were lucky to get out of court at 1:15, much less to get out at 11:30, so we could go to a luncheon. But I think the things that you offer for the membership, the times to socialize, if that's one of your things, if that's something you like, that an attorney likes to do. Plus, you give the ability to be on committees, and as I said before, provide CLEs, some of which can be done virtually, which is very, very helpful, especially to a retired judge that doesn't want to have to get so dressed up to go somewhere.
So where do you see the future of the profession going in Wake County in the coming years?
I don't know. I don't know how lawyers today do it. One of the things that I have noticed that has changed tremendously is that lawyers have to be very specialized. That was not absolutely necessary when I started practicing law. We call it dabbling. You could dabble in a few things. I dabbled in a lot of district court things. But spent most of my time in either domestic court or in criminal court. So I was well prepared when I became a judge to go into. I'd had exposure to every courtroom where district court judges preside. But I think that's impossible now, and I see lawyers that still try to do it, and I don't know how in the world they can. One of the things that the pandemic, I think, caused is that lawyers still had to feed their families, and I saw them take cases in other counties that perhaps they would not have taken if the pandemic had never happened. So it is tough when I do go into Wake County to preside. It's tough getting some lawyers there because they have been forced to go out of county to handle a case, try cases there, and it's very difficult having to juggle all that. It's also difficult to get lawyers to understand that there is a rule of practice that can deal with that, but they don't want to talk about that every time we bring it up. It's like, why didn't you let us know so that the judges could have communicated in two different counties or in Superior Court or District Court or wherever?
What is your best advice to these future lawyers?
Find an area of practice that can bring you some joy, that you like doing, that you care about what happens to your clients. You're not always going to like your client, but that you care about what's going on in the world. Give your legal talents back to our society. People need pro bono advice every once in a while. Become engaged in politics. I know I remember hearing for 40 years that there were too many lawyers in Congress. There were too many lawyers in the General Assembly. And I think the opposite is true, is we don't have enough lawyers there that can point out, hey, this is a problem. Can we fix this on the front end so we're not having a court tell us that we have to fix it on the back end? But find something that you like to do and learn how to do it well.
And what's your best advice to a judge who is just taking the bench?
So I retired at the end of the first 9 months of the pandemic. where we had very few people in our courtrooms. Sometimes the only people that we could socialize with were other judges. And I wrote a letter to all of the incoming judges. There had been a new seat created. In fact, there was one seat that I think we didn't even know who was going to take it yet because of something else that had happened. But I wrote a letter to them that it was my best advice, and I don't know that they took it, but that you can learn more about the law by talking to your colleagues. And that it used to be in Wake County that at lunchtime you could see 4, 5, 6 judges sitting around eating a sandwich or a salad or drinking a Coke, and you could go up and say, let me tell you what happened this morning. How would you have handled it? Find a mentor that's on the bench that you can talk to in whatever kind of relationship that you can make with them now. And don't be afraid of going and asking somebody a question, because somebody's probably had to deal with it before.
Right. Is there anything else that you want to add that I didn't ask or I didn't think of?
No, I don't think so.
We really appreciate it.
No, you're
I hope
welcome.
it made it painless.
No, it was painless. But you ask questions, it's like, well, I don't know. Well, honey, I don't know what was funny.